Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining in today. Now we'll be learning one of the interesting topic in DevOps that's called as YAML. So we'll understand the Kubernetes YAML. So YAML is a markup language, and that's a language in which we'll be writing most of the documents. It's not just in Kubernetes, but in overall DevOps part. So whenever we want to build the infrastructure in AWS, we'll be writing in YAML itself. So YAML is one of the must learn, I will say must learn markup language when it comes to your DevOps journey. So today we'll look at it at a high level and we'll understand how to write an YAML file. So YAML, it actually means yet another markup language. Okay, YAML means yet another markup language. It's actually a text format which we use it to specify the data which is related to configuration and any other settings that we want to make. We'll write it in this YAML format. Now, as we progress in today's learning session, this is the agenda. We'll understand what is YAML and why should you use this YAML. Okay, and then we'll look into the structure of a YAML file. What are the basics of a YAML file? Then we learn about YAML maps, YAML list, and YAML's usage in Kubernetes. And I'll try to show you in a hands-on manner. I mean, how does it actually looks like? So we'll do one thing, guys. We'll learn all these concepts of YAML in a hands-on manner so that you'll get the better idea and better understanding about this YAML file format. So let's get started with today's agenda. What is YAML? So YAML, its official definition is human-friendly data serialization standard for all the programming languages. Okay, so that's what a definition of this YAML file is all about. See here, this YAML, it's this definition that you're seeing. This is a definition from the YAML.org. So this YAML, it was actually created for the commonly used use cases such as configuration file, log file, inter-process messaging, cross-language data steering, object persistence, and complex data structures. So this is the reason this YAML file has been created. Now, just to let you know, why do we use this YAML file? Let's say I have two systems. Okay, I have two systems. One is running on, let's say, Python Django, and another is running on a different architecture itself or a different scenario. Now, when a communication should happen between both the system, this communication should happen such a way that it is language independent. And when that communication is happening, if I want to analyze it, it should be human readable. I mean, if I want to read that what is the communication that is happening between one system to another system, in that scenario, it should be human friendly. And that is where the YAML has been created. So this YAML is actually a human friendly data serialization standard for all the programming language. Now, the question is, why should you use this YAML? Now, there are some advantages for using this YAML file, guys. First and foremost, it is easily readable by humans. The reason is these YAML files that we are going to write, so these YAML files are expressive and extensible. So as a result of this, they're easily readable by humans. And you'll be seeing very shortly how to write this YAML file. And they're easy to implement, and even while using as well, it's very easy to implement for us, and they're easily portable between the programming language. And the best part is they match the native data structures of agile languages that we have out there. And this YAML, yes, when I talk about this YAML file have a consistent model to support the generic tools. And they also, if I want to give some more information, so they support one pass processing. They are actually convenient to use so that you no longer need to add all of the parameters to the command lines. So that's one more advantage. And if I want to give some more examples, so you can actually perform the maintenance. So this YAML file can be added to the source control. Using that, we can actually track the changes. So this YAML file, they are flexible because you can create much complex structures using YAML file, which you can use it on the command line. So these are some of the main advantages of using this YAML file. Now, before this YAML, okay, before this YAML or along with YAML, okay, we have the JSON. The alternatives for this YAML are XML and JSON, guys. So alternatives are XML and JSON. So when I talk about this XML is actually one of the most used in many domains. So when we say this XML, so this XML was actually designed to be backwards compatible with the standard generalized markup language, that is HTML at that time, which was actually designed to support structured documentation. Now, because of this reason, there are some design constraints with this XML. So that's what we are going to face while working with this XML. And then another alternative, as I mentioned, we have the JSON. So when I talk about this JSON's design, the overall goal is simplicity and universality. So that's the goal of this JSON. So with this goal to generate and parse the data, so it actually has reduced the human readability, but the data of this JSON can be processed easily by every modern programming language, which means we have an XML, which is an alternative to YAML. So here, this was originally designed for backward compatible, but the JSON, which is another alternative of YAML, so the main goal was simplicity and universality. And now somewhere down the line, when they were actually designing in this way, so it's easy for the modern programming languages to process this JSON data, but it has reduced the human readability. Now, when it comes to YAML, so this YAML, the design goals are basically increasing the human's readability and a complete information model development. So as a result of this, YAML is a go-to file format whenever I'm writing any complex architecture or the complex configuration file. So this YAML is actually more complex to generate and parse. So here you can think, since it's more complex to generate and parse, you can view it as a natural superset of my JSON file. Okay, so that's how I can give you some comparison between XML, JSON, and YAML. So the only reason that I said is because it just to help you make sure that it will be easier for you to migrate from JSON to YAML if when additional features are required. Okay, so just think that this YAML, that file format we are talking about, it's actually the result of the lessons that we have learned from the XML. Okay, so this is about my YAML file. Now let's look at the structure of my YAML file. All right, so the question is, what is a structure and who should use this YAML file? So here, when I talk about this overall structure of this YAML file, so this YAML file, so like when I take any YAML file, okay, it has some building blocks. So one building block is a key value pair. So this is one of the main building block of a YAML file. So the basic type of entry in a YAML file is of a key value pair. After the key and a colon, there is a space and then there is a value. If I want to write it and show you, let me do that for you guys so that you'll get the overall idea. So it's very simple once you understand the structure. So the basic block, okay, the basic building block of it will be is a key value pair. See, I'll have a key. I'll give you an example. Okay, I'll say it as my fruit. This will act as a key, and then I'll mention colon. I'm going to leave a space, single space, and then I'll have a value. Let's say fruit, banana. So this forms a key value pair. Okay, so this is one of the building block of YAML file. And apart from that, there's one more building block of a YAML file that's called as arrays or list. So here in the scenario, this list will actually have a number of items which are listed under the same name of the list. Now here, the elements of the list would start with a hyphen sign, and there can be n of list. That means I can have n elements in my list. But always remember, the indentation of various elements of the array or this list matters a lot. I'll give you an example. Okay, let's say I have a same thing. Okay, I'll call it as fruits. Now in order to define it as a list, I'll write as colon. Below this, I'll leave a small indentation and I can mention my individual value by saying it as hyphen over here. Hyphen, let's say banana, mango, and I'll write as orange. So this is called as a list, that is list in my YAML file. And the another structure that we have in YAML file is my dictionary. So here this dictionary is actually a more complex type of YAML file. So here what we'll have is, so it will be actually a dictionary and map. I'll give you an example for this dictionary or map, guys. Okay, so in the scenario of a dictionary or a map, so I'll write like this. Okay, banana. Okay, this is a name. Okay, this is a name, and under this I have some key value pair over here. So here I'll have a calories colon 200, fat, let's say, okay, there won't be space over here. Fat, let's say 0.4 grams. I'm just coming up with some random values. Okay, so this is an example of a dictionary or a map in YAML file. So basically we have three building blocks of a YAML file. One is a key value pair, another one is arrays or list, and the another one is called as dictionary or map. Okay, so this is the structure of a YAML file. Now let's look at the general guidelines that we have to follow when we are writing the YAML file. These are some of the very basic rules that we have to remember when I'm writing a YAML file. See, when I'm writing a YAML file, okay, when I'm writing a YAML file, so just let's do one thing. Okay, let's take up some example. Okay, let's take up some example. Let's say I have some details. Okay, I have some details about the banana. Okay, so we have just seen already. So I'm having something as banana. Okay, so I have some properties of banana. So banana's fat content is 0.4 grams. Okay, and here the calories is, let's say, 200 calories. And here I have it as my carbohydrates, let's say 30 grams. So this is the information that I have about the banana. So here this banana has three properties and I can call it as three attributes. Okay, so these three properties are three attributes. If I want to represent these relationship, yes, if I want to represent these relationship, which is under the banana, then the indentation plays an important role. I'll say banana colon, and then all the three things are at the same level. Calories, let's say 200, fat colon 0.4 grams, and carbohydrates 30 grams. So this is what it actually means. Okay, now always remember this indentation plays an important role when you're working in this YAML file, guys. Okay, so first and foremost, the indentation and tabs makes an important element. Now if something is different, I'll give you an example. Okay, so here I have calories, fat, and carbohydrates are at the same level. If I have a different indentation, that says like this, banana, and under this I have the calories, let's say 200, and inside this calories I have fat 0.4 grams, and carbohydrates 0.5 grams. So observe the difference. Okay, so here calories, fat, and carbohydrates are at the same indentation level. Now this time fat and carbohydrates are at the different indentation level. So in such scenarios, the data it would represent will be different. See, banana is connected to calorie. Okay, now under the calorie, I have two elements, that is fat and carbohydrates. So while working with the YAML file, it's very important that you consider the spacing, guys. Okay, so this is how you will be working with this YAML file. This is the in case of list, so it's very important that you consider the indentation while working. Okay, so so this is about the important basics. Now let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and let me just create a simple YAML file. I'll start my VS Code and I'm going to create a very simple YAML file. Okay, my VS Code automatic update got triggered. I'll try to restart again. Okay, so let's get started and let's start by creating a YAML file. Okay, so first I'll write something like this. I'll say invoice, okay, colon 2000, and I'll say date colon 2012, let's say 1010. So this is a date value. So what you can clearly see right now is here I have mentioned my invoice as a key, and the value that I have assigned is a numerical value, and I have mentioned a key as date, and here I have assigned the date value. Okay, now while mentioning the date, I have mentioned the date as DDMM, YY, MM, and DD. So this is the format that we'll be specifying the scalar value of date. Okay, so this is how I can specify the scalar key value pair. Or I can mention the collection as well. I can mention the collection as well, which contains the multiple values. For example, I'll write something like this. I'll say bill2, okay, and I'll write as, let's say, ID 001. I'll just give an example, okay, and then under this I'm going to mention my multiple values. First name, let's say Krishna, and then let's say address. Okay, so when I'm mentioning my address, okay, so under this address I'll mention my multi-line. Now if I want to add a multi-line element, that is the multi-line string, then the way that I'm going to write is something like this. I'll use this special character, that is this pipe symbol, and I can mention the values as per my requirement. Okay, so in this way I can start creating my YAML file by defining a key value pair. And we have also learned about the dictionary, so list or dictionaries that we have seen earlier. So in the scenario of dictionary, let's say I have a dictionary or the list as product, and under this I'll have some key value pair. Let's say like when I say list is actually a collection of values. For example, SKU1, okay, so this is one element in over here, and okay, quantity, let's say 2, and likewise. So like this is actually a list or dictionary, guys. So here I'm specifying the name of the list or dictionary, and I'm maintaining the key value pairs, or I can only have a direct values as per my preference. Description, let's say mobile cover. So these are the key value pairs. So overall, whenever we are defining a YAML file, okay, we define a YAML file by using the key value pair. So when I say collection of values, so these are the collection of values where the key value pairs are actually used. So this is about the YAML file, the basics of this YAML file. Okay, now here in the above scenario, I have whatever that I have written over here. So this we can actually treat it as a collection. Okay, you can treat this as a collection. So here in this scenario, so this is actually treated as a collection. We can also have a multi-line connection and so on. So this is how we would basically create a YAML file. Okay, so it is like we'll just try to write it in the format of key value pair. Okay, now I'll get one more example over here to give you the better clarity on this YAML file. Okay, so let's do one thing. I'll try to modify this itself and I'll give you some more information on this. So here, these values that I have mentioned right now. So invoice 2000 and date value. So these are called as a scalar value. So when it comes to scalar value, I can have a string values, I can have an integers, I can have dates, I can also have the Boolean values. So currently I've added integer and the date, right? So if I give you an example, let's say is underscore public, I'll mark it as true. So this is actually a Boolean values. Okay. So this is actually a Boolean value. So I can add the scalars of various types. And then we can have a list. Okay. We can have a list. A list is nothing but the collection of items. And in the scenario of a list, the way that I'll be writing a list in the YAML file is I'll specify the name of a list and I'll mention my individual elements with the help of a dash with indentation separating my parent. I'll give you an example. Let's say I have a category. Okay, I have a category. So under this category, I'll use a single tab. Okay, then I'll mention it as AWS. Let's say DevOps. Okay, I'll mention it as Azure. Okay, so here the categorical values that you see over here, the list of items. So this collection of items are the collection of items that I have it under the list that is over here. Okay, so this is how I'll be I'll be working on this. Now, if I want to create any map, or like when I say like map is nothing but the key value pair, if I want to mention or if I want to specify any map over here, so I can either create it by increasing the indentation level or by resolving the previous step. Okay, so this is the overall idea behind this YAML file. Okay, so I can create the scalars, I can create the values, I can specify the collection of values, and I can work as per my requirement. So I can also mention the multiple values in an alternative days in alternative way as well. Let's say course info. This is a one more one that I'm creating for this key. Instead of specifying one below the another, so I can also make use of Python list format itself. So I can say course developer. Okay, I'll say Nachiket Murthy Edureka. So these are the three values that I have right now inside this list. So this is another way of defining the multiple values. Now I can also have a key value pair inside this list as well. So this is how the overall structure of a YAML file would look like. Okay. Now with this learning of overall structure of my YAML file, let's take up an example of a Kubernetes YAML file and how it would look like. So if I want to show you an like representation of a Kubernetes YAML file, let me open one image that I have right now. So here, this is how a typical Kubernetes YAML file would look like. Okay, so this is how a YAML file in Kubernetes would look like. So what we'll be doing in the scenario of this Kubernetes is, so we'll be defining the Kubernetes resources in a declarative way. So because of this reason, it is easier for us to read what is happening over here. So when I say Kubernetes resources, I can specify the number of pod, what are the services and the deployments by specifying in a declarative way using my YAML file. This is one of the example which explains the creation of deployment resource by using this YAML file format. Okay, so here this actually contains both my basic as well as the advanced specification. I'll try to highlight some of the important parts of this YAML file which is being created. Okay, so here in this scenario, okay, let's say the spec. Okay, so the like if you look at the spec, under spec I have multiple values. I have revision history limit, minimum ready seconds, selector, strategy, and multiple things. So if I want to select a specific value, okay, if I want to select a specific value, let's say strategy type, then the way that I would write is I'll say spec.strategy.type. So this actually means that, so here I've mentioned as rolling update. So it means that suppose there is another version of the application that needs to be deployed, and during the deployment phase you need to update without facing an outage. So in such scenarios we actually specify this rolling update strategy. So by using this rolling update strategy, it actually allows my Kubernetes to update a service without facilitating an outage by proceeding to update the pods one at a time. That is the meaning of this rolling update. And this is one of the strategy that we would specify while deploying an application. That this is what we would require, isn't it? See, when you're running a company like an Amazon, Flipkart, or any company, no one likes to have it an outage unless and until it is mandatory. So in order to avoid the outage, we'll actually specify the strategy type in our Kubernetes file in a declarative manner like this. So here in this scenario, the strategy type that is mentioned is rolling update. And here under my rolling update, I have something called as max unavailable. See, I have max unavailable is 1, which means here I'm specifying as what is the maximum number of pod that can be unavailable during the rolling update. So that is what I'm controlling over here. So under the strategy, under the rolling update, inside this, I have my max unavailable. And we also have something that's called as max search. So this actually represents the maximum number of pod that can be scheduled above the desired number of pod. And here, if I look at the spec file, we also have something that's called as min ready seconds. So here I have mentioned as 10. So this is called as min ready seconds. Now here, this is actually an optional integer which describes the minimum number of seconds for which a new pod should be ready without any of its container crashing for it to be considered as available. That's called as a min ready seconds. And we have the revision history limit that we have right here. So this revision history limit, it's actually an integer number which we would actually use it to tell the Kubernetes explicitly. So it's an explicit way of declaring how many old replica sets that we have to retain at any given time. And we have something called as spec selector. So this is actually an object which tells the Kubernetes deployment controller to only target pods which matches the specified labels. So the labels is Nginx and distally. So this is the deployer that I'm using. So thus, if I want to target like only target pods with the labels as app over here in this example, okay, so and deployer, we can actually make the modification to our deployment YAML file. So you can clearly observe by defining a YAML file, by writing the configuration in the YAML file, we will have better control. We will have better control, and it is very easy for us to read what is the configuration that is being maintained when it comes to this Kubernetes. So this is one of the great advantage when it comes to working with YAML file. Okay, now apart from this guys, so if I want to come back to my slide and continue in a learning journey with the slides, so the next topic that we have over here is called as YAML maps. I think we have covered already, but let's complete it through the slides. So first we have the YAML maps. So whenever we are defining anything over here, okay, especially when we write any YAML file, so the first line of this config file is a separator. It's actually an optional, okay? It's actually an optional. And then here we have mentioned as app version, we have mentioned the version of my application, and we have mentioned the kind. The kind means it's actually a pod object, okay? So this kind, it is actually going to tell my Kubernetes what is the type of object which is being defined. So here in this example, I have mentioned the kind as pod. This means I'm going to write a YAML file which is going to define my pod object. And we'll have the API version over here that is mentioned as v1. So it actually defines what is the schema version that we have to use when we are creating the object. So here, this file is actually creating the pod-like object, and it is telling the Kubernetes to build it using the V1 pod schema. So that is the overall meaning of this API version and the kind that we have right now. Okay, so that's how we'll be writing. Now here, what it is going to do is this is a map which lets us to associate name value pairs, which of course is convenient when you are trying to set up the configuration information. So here in this scenario, I'm saying in my YAML file that, okay, this belongs to the pod kind with using the schema version of V1. Okay, now along with that, we can also specify some more complicated structures by creating a key that maps to another map rather than a string. See, this is a key and it is mapping to another map. So this is going to help us to specify some more complex way of structures as per our requirement, which is what we have seen in our example YAML file as well. Now let's look at the structured learning approach at Edureka. See, when it comes to upskilling, when it comes to learning, it's always important that you follow the structured learning approach. Structured learning approach is a learning approach which will help you to master a specific technology in a shortest time possible, and also covering all the required terms and technologies which will help you to become job ready. So Edureka believes in this approach, and when it comes to the structured learning approach at Edureka, especially for this Kubernetes certification training, let's see how it would look like. So this is a learning approach which is recommended by industry experts. So as part of your Kubernetes certification program in module 1, you learn some of the core concepts and the networking of Kubernetes. Then in module 2, you learn about Kubernetes services and scheduling. In module 3, you learn about Kubernetes controller. In module 4, you learn about persistent storage in Kubernetes. In module 5, you learn about how to secure the cluster. In module 6, you learn about logging and monitoring the cluster. In module 7, you learn to perform the troubleshooting the cluster. So by completing this 7 modules, you'll be a job ready professional when it comes to the skill set of Kubernetes, which is in great demand right now. And as you can clearly see, each topic is having its own hands-on learning. This would ensure that whatever you are learning, you know how to implement it, and you are going to learn with the help of the industry expert in your learning program. And we have also learned about the YAML list. So let's have a quick revision as well. So when it comes to YAML list, it's nothing but a sequence of objects. It's just a sequence of object right now. So I'll write as a key and just ignore the indentation. So indentation, you know already. So we'll here it's wrong in slide, but we'll have a same indentation level when it comes to YAML list. Okay, so alternatively, I can also define it in a Python script format as well. That is the Python list format as well. Then the next topic is YAML usage in Kubernetes. So we have already seen an example. So let's see one more example. I think it's the same one. Yeah, it's the same image. So here, as you can clearly see, we have just seen this image as well. So when it comes to YAML maps, so here the Kubernetes resources are created in a declarative way. Obviously, by making use of this YAML file, it's easy for us to configure it and we can say what should happen. Now, Kubernetes resources such as pods, services, deployments are created by using this YAML file. And we have already shown you what exactly this important terms in this YAML file is representing it when it comes to creation. Now here, this is an example. So here I've mentioned my API version. So this extension is the API group and V1 beta 1 is the API version. So this is one way or another way of specifying the API version. And this kind file is the Q deployment file. So this represents the deployment YAML file. Okay, so this is about the basics of YAML file, which you would require for the Kubernetes section. So with this, we come to the end of this section, guys. We come to the end of our learning journey. Let's do one thing. I think I have some code already. So let's look at it in an hands-on manner as well. So we'll try to generate some pod, or we'll try to create some pod from the YAML file. Okay, so I think let me open up my PowerShell. Okay, in order to do this practice, you have to have the Docker desktop installed in your system. Along with Docker desktop, you have to enable the Kubernetes from the Docker. So in order to test that, Docker hyphen hyphen version. So this is going to display the version of Docker. I can also see kubectl version. So this is going to display the, I think, let me show you guys. So this will display the version of my Kubernetes cluster. Okay, now let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and do this activity. I think I've already cloned a repository in my local system. So let's go ahead and I'll get the pod. Okay, so I'll write as cd. Okay, next I'll say kubectl. Okay, I'll write as kubectl, and I'll write get pods. So when I write kubectl get pods, it says no resources found in the namespace. Okay, now what I'll do is, this says there is no resources that are found in my namespace. Now what we'll do is, we'll use the pod manifest file. Okay, we'll use the pod manifest file and we are going to create the pod. Okay, we'll use the pod manifest file and we are going to generate the pod. So what I'll do is, I'll go inside that folder. Let's see where we have that pod file. Okay, it's in my C drive, it's in this folder. Okay, so I'm looking for pods folder. Let's see whether yeah, so I'll go inside my pods folder and I have a file that's called as pod.yaml file. So I'll go inside that folder right now. So I'll say pods. Okay, now what I'll do is, I'll say kubectl. Okay, I'll say apply -f, and I'm going to write as pod.yml and I'll press the enter key. So it tells me that pod hello pod created. So here it says the pod has been created. So the thing is, it may not be completely deployed and available yet. The reason, because it would actually take some time for the Kubernetes to pull the image. Now, in order to see whether my pod is ready or not, what I can use the command that says as kubectl get pods, and if I press the enter key, it's going to tell me whether my pod is ready. So now it says the container is ready. The container is currently running. So what it has happened is, okay, what it has happened is, so here this has downloaded the container from the Docker Hub. So this has downloaded, it has pulled the images from the Docker Hub, and then once it pulled the images, it started the container. So what it has done right now is, currently my status is running. This proves that my pod is currently running on a healthy node and it is monitored by my kubelet process. Okay, so this is what I have done right now. If I open this pod.yaml file, this is the pod.yaml file that I have actually used. So if I open this pod.yaml file, you'll see the same YAML kind of data. See, it says API version. What is the kind of the object? I've mentioned some metadata over here, and I've mentioned some spec, and I've mentioned what is the image that I have to pull out from the Docker Hub, and what is the container port. So all these things, all this configuration that I have done over here with the help of my YAML file format. So this was about the introduction to YAML file format and how it is used on Kubernetes. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Okay, so take care guys. I look forward to seeing you next time.